Okay. Ex- Character info: Jill Valentine backstory. Excelling at lock-picking and bomb disposal, Jill Valentine was a brilliant special tactics, and rescue service stars agent. After bravely rescuing her team members from a devastating biohazard, she returned to Raccoon City to save the survivors left behind. But a lethal and ruthless super soldier labeled Nemesis was on her trail. After dealing the Nemesis a few blows, Jill rushed to the basement and picked the lock of a cold room. Once inside, her body turned numb as a black fog engulfed her. Uh, Leon S. Kennedy backstory. Having faced hordes of zombies on his first day as a police officer, Leon S. Kennedy had to learn the job quickly. Investigating the biohazard that had ravaged Raccoon City, Leon infiltrated an abandoned Umbrella Corporation laboratory where a sudden and unexpected black fog led him astray. Uh, Killers. I read all the survivors. Alright, the Trapper backstory. Evan McMillan idolized his father. It wasn't just that he was heir to a great fortune, it was the way he ran the estate. Raised under his firm hand, Evan had taken to running the workforce with an iron fist. Production was always high, and the McMillan estate pro- prospered, 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 prospered under father and son. As Archie McMillan's mental health slowly degenerated, Evan protected him from the herd who wanted a piece of the fortune. No matter what his father asked him, Evan would do. When Archie McMillan finally snapped, Evan became his enforcer in what would become known as the worst mass murder in modern history. They never proved that Evan led over 100 men into those dark tunnels before detonating the explosives and sealing them to their fate. The tale of McMillan Estate is a tale of wealth and power gone very wrong. How many victims fell to the hands of father and son is unknown. No record was ever made of what became of Evan McMillan. His father is another unsolved puzzle, found in the basement of his own warehouse, dead and abandoned. The Wraith. Backstory. Philip Ojimo came to this country without anything other than hope for a new beginning. He was happy as he got offered a job at Auto Haven Wreckers, a small scrapyard where bride cops turned a blind eye on the somewhat shady business that took place. Ojimo didn't care. He had seen criminal activity up close in his homeland, and as long as he didn't get involved, he let things be. He just fixed cars and handled the crusher. Something he did really well. A car went in, a small, metallic cube came out. It was not until one gloomy day that he, just by accident, saw some blood coming from one of the uncrushed cars. As he opened the trunk, he found a young man gagged with tied hands and panic-filled eyes. Ojimo freed the man, who managed to run 10 feet before Ojimo's boss stopped him and slit his throat. As Ojimo demanded answers, he was explained that he'd been nothing more than a simple executioner, as more or less every car had a soul in them. This was a service the scrapyard provided to certain clients. Ojimo snapped and went ballistic. He threw his boss into the crusher and let it slowly compress. As the head stuck out, Ojimo grabbed it and pulled head and spine out of the body. Then he left and was never seen again. The Hillbilly. Backstory. The son of wealthy landowners Max and Evelyn Thompson, this unnamed boy was an unwanted child born to savage parents. Hideously disfigured, he was shut away from society. So ashamed they were of their son, they bricked him into a room and fed him through a hole in the wall. When the boy escaped, he took his revenge, savagely and terribly slaughtering the parents who had tortured him instead of raising him. After the deed was done, he continued to live his life at the farm, taking out his deranged violence on the animals that were allowed to run free. As he finally broke free from his shackles, he ran through the cornfields, chasing and slaughtering whatever he could find. They never found the bodies of Max and Evelyn, but they did find tortured and disemboweled animals all over the farm. Coldwind Farm was quickly settled and land split up and sold off. There was never a buyer for the farmhouse, perhaps because of that sound of a chainsaw you could hear throughout those hot summer nights. The Nurse. Backstory. Sally Smithson came to town with dreams of children's feet and laughter in a wooden home built by her husband Andrew. And one day Andrew's foreman had to pay Sally a visit, forever changing her life. With no other option, Sally had to find a way, but the only employment she could get was at the Crotus Pren Asylum. She started at the bottom, doing the hard night shift. Over the years, her mind had reached its limit. Decades of seeing horrid things that violate the eyes. Finally, she could not take it anymore, and concepts of purification emerged inside her. As the morning staff arrived one day in September, they found over 50 patients dead in their beds, and 4 staff members also dead. Only Sally had survived the night, but her mind was gone, rocking back and forth non-stop. They got her into an ambulance, but that ambulance never reached the hospital. It was found crashed in a nearby wood. All the staff dead and Sally nowhere to be found. The Huntress. Backstory. As soon as Anna was able to walk, her mother started teaching her how to survive a harsh, solitary life in the northern woods. Living in such an extremely remote and dangerous area required skill and resilience. When sunlight became too dim for productive activities, they would take refuge in their house, a sturdy old cabin constructed to resist the toughest winters. Close to the hearth's warm Anna would rest in her mother's arms, surrounded by the few wooden toys and masks she had crafted for her. Drifting off to sleep with stories and lullabies, she dreamt happy dreams, ignorant of the events that would soon change everything. Anna and her mother were stalking a great elk through the woods. They knew it was dangerous prey, but it had been a particularly difficult winter and they were almost out of food. The specter of starvation frightened them more than any forest creature. Without warning, the elk reared, bellowed, and charged at Anna. She was paralyzed with fear as the whole world seemed to shake under the immense beast's pounding hoofs. The elk was close enough for Anna to see the murderous fury in its eyes when her mother threw herself in its path, axe in hand. A blood-curdling scream escaped from her lips as the elk impaled her upon its antlers and hoisted her into the air. With all her strength, she brought her axe down on its head again and again while it tried to shake her loose. With a sickening crack, the antlers snapped, and Anna's mother was free. The beast collapsed. Anna was too small to move her mother's broken body, so she sat with her in the clearing where she had fallen. To distract her from the dying elk's cries, Anna's mother held her and hummed her favorite lullaby. They stayed like that, the huntress and the elk, getting quieter and colder, until Anna was all alone in the silent forest. Eventually she stood up and started the long walk back home. Still a child, she knew just enough about life in the frozen forest to survive. She followed her instincts and became one with the wild. She got older and stronger and practiced her hunt. As she grew into a dangerous predator, her humanity became a half-remembered dream. She widened her territory and lived off her hunts. She worked her way up through squirrels and hare and mink and foxes. Eventually she grew tired of them and hunted more dangerous animals like wolves and bears. When unsuspected travelers came through her woods, she discovered her new favorite prey, humans. Unlucky souls who strayed into her territory were slaughtered like any other animal. She liked to collect their tools and colorful garments and especially toys when there were little ones. But she could never bring herself to kill the little girls. Girls she would take back to her house deep in the woods. They were precious, and looking at them woke up something deep in her heart. She craved the closeness of a loved one, a child of her own. Among the pillaged wooden toys, dolls, and storybooks she could read, the girls would be tied by the neck with a rough and chafing rope fastened firmly to the wall. She couldn't let them wander off, or they would surely die outside. Every time, the girls would waste away and die of cold or starvation or sickness. Every time it plunged Anna deeper into pain and sorrow and madness. She was compelled to try again and started raiding the nearest villages to slaughter families and kidnap their daughters. She wore one of the animals' masks her mother crafted for her so many years earlier to try to calm the frightened children. Villagers spread the legend of a half-beast lurking in Red Forest, the huntress who killed men and ate little girls. War eventually came to the forest. German soldiers began to pass through, on the march to attack the collapsing Russian Empire. During these dark times, there were no more travelers. The villagers had abandoned their homes and no more little ones to be found, only soldiers. Many of them were found with violent axe wounds. Whole groups disappeared mysteriously. Once the war was over, the rumors of the huntress disappeared with it, engulfed by the Red Forest. The Shape. Backstory. Some humans are simply bad seeds. Seeds infused with a distilled and pure form of evil. Michael Myers is one of those seeds. He had no issues with causing the pain of others. Instead, it was exactly what he sought. But even life can be tough on those with minds filled with terror. The difference is just how one goes about to solve those problems. For Michael, he had to kill to find some inner peace, as he took his sister's life. The police found a silent boy dressed as a clown at the scene. When one stumbles upon a growing fire, one does not pour gasoline on it. But this was an action taken by officials that had no idea how it would shape this demon in the boy's body. Sending Michael to a mental institution was a feeble attempt to save the child. Unsuccessful therapy and nightly screams just made him even more introvert and deranged. People hoped that Michael Myers would end up a parenthesis, soon to be forgotten and buried, a failure that soon were to rot away. But then, he escaped. The Hag. Backstory. Lisa Sherwood grew up in a quiet town. The people of the village were kind, and the elders helped settle their disputes and keep the old tradition alive. Lisa was particularly fond of the charms they taught her to draw for safety and good fortune. One night, as she was walking home through the woods, a terrible storm struck without warning. In the slick, wet darkness, she lost her footing and struck her head. Slipping in and out of consciousness, she watched dark shapes approach between the trees. Soon they were close enough for her to make out their evil, hungry grins. They kept her chained to a wall in a flooded cellar. Through the gloom, she could see others whose open wounds swarmed with flies. They did not survive long once the cannibals began carving bites from their bodies with their rusted blades, but somehow Lisa persisted. Starved and mutilated, her gaunt arms became loose in their shackles. She pulled, and the metal tore through skin and muscle until she was free. Her flesh oozed vicious yellow pus, and bones were visible beneath gangrenous, gangrenous wounds. She could go no further. Delirious, she thought of home. She thought of the elders. She traced the symbols they had taught her. A dark hunger stirred inside her. It yearned for blood. She chose vengeance. The police search eventually brought them to the old house in the swamp. Its inhabitants had been dismembered and devoured. The elders' charms were scrawled in blood on the floor. Lisa's body was never found. The Doctor. Backstory. Showing exceptional aptitude in psychology, Herman was handpicked for special training in an advanced neuroscience program located in secret black site facility in Illinois known as the Larry Memorial Institute, really a front for the CIA. This is where Herman met Dr. Otto Stamper, where under this guidance, Herman began to use strange and ever increasingly vicious methods to extract information from prisoners sent to the institute, which was also a covert prison and re-education center for whoever was the USA's current nemesis. His liberal use of violent electroshock therapy revealed dramatic results, and several threats to national security were uncovered. Over the years, Herman became known as the Doctor, and no one ever questioned if he had even held a medical certificate or even what happened to the prisoners after they had given up their information. It was only after the Leary Memorial Institute went silent for a week that the true horror was finally discovered. The personnel, patients, and prisoners were all found dead with all types of head trauma. All personnel and prisoners' bodies were accounted for, including Dr. Otto Stamper, but no sign of Herman, the Dr. Carter. The Cannibal. Backstory. Whether killers performed their heinous acts by the compulsions of their diseased minds or if they are forced into them by external pressures has long been a matter of debate. But for one killer, nature and nurture are inextricably linked. Leatherface kills not from a desire to exert his will or over others to satisfy cardinal urges or even to quiet the voices in his head. He kills because he is scared, scared that others will hurt him, scared that his family will be displeased with him, scared that their shared willingness to eat human flesh will be discovered. He does as he is told. His family loves him, and that is all that matters. Outsiders are a threat, and threats need to be dealt with. Like those kids that came out into the house uninvited, walked in like they owned the place, looked around the house, trying to find out its family secrets, no doubt. But Leatherface dealt with them, protected his family, just as he's been taught. He is not just protector, he has many roles, and each role has its own face. He serves dinner, cares for the family, dresses well when they eat. His grandpa and ma used to care for them all. But grandpa is old now, and she has been still for a while, so Leatherface and his brothers had to take over. Family is everything to him. Family is security and safety. But even though he did his best, one of those kids got away. He tried to stop her, chasing after her as fast as he could. But she had help. Another outsider driving a truck. The evil trucker killed his brother, ran him over like he was a possum. In a fury, Leatherface leapt at him. the saw ready to avenge his family, but the trucker was too quick. He knocked Leatherface aside and turned his own saw against him. As he watched the outsiders driving away, the rage, grief, and pain combined with the worry about what would happen to his family now. They would surely return with the police, and the police would take his brothers, his grandpa. Without them, what would he do? Without their commands, he would wither and die. As his world collapsed, Leatherface spun in circles, swinging the saw all around, trying to fight off the myriad external threats that surrounded him. Then another feeling overtook him. It came from outside his vision, crawling over his skin with cold dread. He realized that no matter what outsider could do to him, there was something worse, something bigger that lived in the shadows. He was filled with a terror unlike they had ever felt before. Any he had felt before. But it was almost comforting, like the fear he'd felt with his family, the fear of disappointing them. He was brought to a place that was familiar but unknowable, and he instinctively knew what he had to do. He couldn't fail it. The way he had his family, the way he had with his family. Outsiders would come, but he would use his skills to overcome any threats. There would be screaming, but he could make the world quiet again, until the only sound remaining was the blessed howl of the saw. Let the outsiders come. The Nightmare. Backstory. Even while he lived, Freddy Krueger was a creature of nightmare for those who truly knew him. Hiding behind a mask of warmth and friendliness, Freddy's actual temperament was known only to his victims. When those victims were finally heard, the parents of Springwood tracked Freddy down and took the law into their own hands. They thought fire had rid them of a monster that night, that their children were finally saved, but evil as strong as his has a way of surviving. Years passed, the horror was buried, the victims mercifully forgot. Then, somehow, Freddy returned, and dreams became nightmares once again. Freddy focused his anger on those he felt had wronged him, building up to his one true obsession, Nancy Holbrook. But he underestimated her strength and resourcefulness. Together with her friend, Quentin, she managed to weaken Freddy, mutilating him and leaving him for dead once more. Dead didn't want Freddy the first time he encountered it. Why did they think it would take him now? He emerged once more, consumed with vengeance. Then he turned his sights on the boy who had blocked his path to Nancy, his number one. Freddy invaded Quentin's dreams, terrorizing him night after night, until his strength and defenses would be at their lowest. When the time was right, he forced the boy to return to the dark reflection of Badham Preschool. Here he would have his final revenge. Freddy stalked the boy through the school's halls. He took his time, savoring every moment of the hunt. This was what he enjoyed the most, the smell of their sweat in the air, the ragged gasp of their terrified breath. They were his to play with. There was the boy, at the end of a long corridor, too tired and scared to run anymore. Resigned to his fate, Freddy closed in, arms wide, claws raking the walls, their tips traced along a pipe, the metallic shrieking only adding to the boy's apprehension. A shower of sparks rained on the ground and into the liquid that covered the tiled floor. A blue flame blossomed and quickly engulfed the room. The boy took flight as Freddy burst from the flames in a fury. Rooms and walls raced past in a blur until they were in Freddy's basement. There would be no escape from here. Slowly, Freddy closed in on the boy. His fear was so strong now that Freddy could almost taste it, but his eyes burned with the defiant hatred that was almost admirable. Freddy drew back his claws. Then Freddy felt another presence with him, something old, powerful and dark. A miasma enveloped him, and the only sensation was a sound like wooden beams flexing and creaking in the distance. The echoing groan of metal crushed against metal. Something arcane and unknowable halfway between language and pure terror. There was a moment of falling and spinning, and then Freddy was back in the school. But not his school. It looked the same, but it felt different. His powers were tempered in some ways and focused in others. The boy had gone for now, but other prey walked the hallways. Some would be inconsequential. Others would become his new favorites. All would fall before his claws. The Pig. Backstory. When John Kramer, better known as Jigsaw, planned for his son to be born during the Chinese Zodiac's Year of the Pig, he wanted it to represent fertility and rebirth, a new beginning for him and his wife, and the start of a charmed life for his son. But that plan was shattered on the night that a junkie broke into his wife's clinic, hoping to score. After this event resulted in the death of his unborn son, John finally caught up with the junkie, making him his first test subject, and the pig was changed forever too. It became a representation of the disease that was rotten John from the inside, a reminder that we are just meat unless we elevate ourselves through our actions, by grasping life from the jaws of death. The pig became a vessel, an agent of Jigsaw, conveying the subjects to their test. For some of those who emerged victorious, the pig could still be a rebirth into their new lives as apprentices, even disciples of Jigsaw. That was the case for Amanda Young, a troubled soul whose life had been a catalogue of harm, both to herself and those around her. That changed when she faced and bested Jigsaw's test. Deciding her life was worth something, she became devoted to Jigsaw's cause, ready to take over when the cancer consumed him. But she became more dependent on John, her anguish at his impending death combining with a belief that their test subjects were capable of saving themselves, of being reborn in the crucible of the games. Seeing this, John presented her with another game, another chance to save herself. But Amanda let her rage and jealousy rule her actions. She failed the test and took a bullet as a consequence, bleeding out on the tiled floor. Darkness engulfed Amanda's vision, accompanied by a sound like creaking wood. Then she was in the forest, once more viewing the world through the eyes of a pig. Trees surrounded her, their branches clawing at her from all sides. Waves of panic washed over her, and she could hear her breath reverberating inside the mask. Had she been damned, cursed to spend her days here in this guise? Or maybe she was another test. Or maybe this was another test. Maybe she hadn't failed at all. John always thought one step ahead of everyone else, planned for every eventuality. And he would never give up on her, surely. Jigsaw may have gone, but he had passed her on to another. A being for whom she would be, the pig again. Ultimately, she saw now that she had been right in the choices she had made. The time for games was over. There was no chance of redemption for any of them. They were meat, and meat was destined for slaughter. The Clown. Backstory. Kenneth Chase was born in 1932 by a difficult labor, which his mother wouldn't survive. This event drove a rift between him and his father that never closed. As the boy grew, so did his father's resentment and his drinking habit. By the time Ken was at school, they lived mostly separate lives. Academically, he was unremarkable, coasting by on his significant athletic prowess. He grew tall and strong, excelling at the track events, but shunned any attempts to coax him into team sports. On his walk home from school, he would often find feathers on the ground, and he soon began a collection, keeping them in a cigar box under his bed. With his father either at work or in an alcohol-induced stupor, Kenneth had hours to spend alone, transfixed by the regularity of the feathers' barbs and feeling the softness as he ran them over his lips. Watching the birds that came to the feeder in his garden, he imagined how soft they must be, and resolved to catch one. He congratulated himself with the local dentist, soon procuring some anesthetic. Using this, he rigged up a trap on the feeder that he hoped would knock out a bird long enough that he could touch it. After a few failed attempts, he managed to trap a robin. As it lay in his hands, he felt a sudden rush of a life at his mercy. He had planned to release it once he recovered from the anesthetic. Instead, as its eyes flickered back into consciousness and began to struggle, his grip remained firm. His fingers slowly tightened around its throat, squeezing until its chest feathers were finally still. He disposed of the body, keeping just a feather, with which he started a new collection, discarding the others as fake. By the late 1940s, Kenneth had left school and started working as a busboy at a local diner. He had also escalated to larger prey like squirrels, raccoons, and dogs, becoming skilled at customizing anesthetic dosage for each. In early 1954, a young man went missing and the town was turned upside down in the search. A few months later, Kenneth's father, while doing some work in the crawl space under the house, found a cigar box. He broke open and saw, to his horror, that it contained feathers, animal paws, and a man's finger. Returning from work, Kenneth saw his father leaving the crawl space with a cigar box in his hands. He turned on his heel and never went home again. After a few weeks of living rough, he encountered a traveling circus and, with his prodigious strength, was hired to work the ropes. He assumed a new name, Jeffrey Hawk. Suddenly surrounded by a close-knit community, Jeffrey had to learn to socialize. He donned a new personality like a disguise, quickly becoming known as charming and helpful, and was welcomed into his new family. Over the next decade, he stayed with the circus, traveling the length and breadth of the USA. But with the itinerant life providing few repercussions, he fell into bad habits: drink, junk food, drugs. He indulged all of them to excess. For a time, these vices were enough, but then his old urges returned and his nomadic existence became a cover for him to resume killing. He stole clothes and makeup from performers, fashioning a disguise that would let him get close to his victims before he anesthetized them, bringing them back to his caravan, where they would awake to find themselves bound and at his mercy. He would finally get to have his fun, mentally and physically torturing them, their screams fueling him, before being lost in the night. Once their strength was at its lowest, he would carefully examine their fingers, searching for the prettiest, running them over his tongue to find the tastiest. Once he found the best, he would cut it from their hand and proudly add it to his collection. disposing of the rest of the body as a pointless waste. Men, women, young, old, he didn't care. The essence of a good collection is in the variety, in the memories and stories they evoke. He removed the costume less and less, shedding his old personality with it, fully embracing the clown, his true self. With time, he became complacent and sloppy. A victim managed to work free of her bindings while he was sleeping off the drink. She escaped screaming for help, and he awoke to find the rest of the circus bearing down on him. He whipped his horse, and the caravan disappeared into the night. Since then he has roamed the country, a parasite who could always be found at a carnival or circus, but been who would never been seen on any playbill. He lured those brave or foolish enough to come near, trapped them, and moved on before they could be found missing. Somewhere along the way, he left the ordinary roads of the USA behind them, traveling through a veil of mist and entering a new realm. It was a place of transience and impertinence, perfectly in suiting the life he had chosen to lead. Feeling more at home than he had in his entire life, he set up camp and waited for his first visitor. So the spirits next.